So here we are at the intersection of these two trails, and I want everyone to just take a minute and do a 360 and see if you can point out to yourself 4 distinct oak trees without even getting up close and personal. Well, actually, first everyone turn towards this really dense little stand. What is going on here? If you had never been here before and you saw this stand of trees, what would you immediately be wondering?
Water nearby.
Is there water here? Yeah. And sure enough, you'll see that there is this little drainage, and in big rain years like this last one, it's basically a creek for most of the wet season. So what might that tell you about this big tree right here in front of us?
It might be in Oregon.
It's a water sucker. And any guesses?
Oregon.
Which one it is?
Oregon? No, I was just thinking Oregon likes more water.
Valley oak? It's a valley oak.
Okay.
So one thing it tells you is valley oaks like deep, wet soil. And then if we turn back the way we came, all those scraggly bluish looking things?
Could they be blue oak?
Yeah. Blue oak is the most common oak tree in California throughout the state. It's also the most drought tolerant. And it's blue. You'll see it as we go farther up. And the more you get an eye for it, you'll see it. The leaves have a bluish tinge. And if you're in the blue oak group, you're going to try to figure out why it has that bluish tinge. And then this is cheating because we're not up close enough to see it. This is an Oregon oak right here, and there's another one over here that our Oregon oak group is going to check out. But they're notoriously similar to blue oaks and notoriously similar to valley oaks, and we'll talk about why in a sec. And then what's the other big one we haven't talked about?
Right behind you.
Right, this is the coast live oak, which is, unlike the other 3, is evergreen, right? It keeps its leaves all year long. So especially in the middle of winter, you can really tell what the coast live oaks are because they're the only ones that have leaves. So,
Where?
Right here.
This one, that one, and as we get farther in, we'll see more of them.
Is this little bushy thing part of that? Or is that
the little bushy thing underneath it? This is just the canopy coming down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what is this bushy thing that looks like it's a regrowth?
Dead branches on the ground, you would see tons of little holes, right? So this, when I first started working here, this was this glorious acorn granary tree. And there's a family of woodpeckers that guarded it, and you'll learn more about acorn woodpeckers in your bird class. But it is a valley oak, and it just, I don't know when was that, a couple years ago, it gave up the ghost, but it's resprouting. So because it's cool today, it's not as obvious the difference in feeling between the oak woodlands and some of the other habitats, but I also want you to be kind of imagining what this would be like if the sun was out. And what we're going to do now is, I would like each of the 5 oaks, we're going to send you to your tree, and I just want you to spend a couple minutes. I don't actually have a watch. Does someone have the time?
We didn't bring our watches because we were told not to bring our watches.
10:13.
Okay, so Jen, who is the black oaks? Okay, you're going to go with Jen just a little ways up here to your black oak. And what I want you to do is use your naturalist skills to make as many observations in your field journal about the leaf. Is it prickly? Is it soft? Is it wide? Is it flat? What does the overall tree look like? How would you describe this tree just with hand gestures? If you were talking to a non-English speaker, what might you use to describe this tree? What nickname would you give it? Those are all some of the things to think about, and we're just going to spend about 5 minutes, and then we're going to meet over at the Buckeye tree over there. So the other groups follow me, and I'll I'll send you to your tree. So, let's ask, what do you guys? Blue. I'm going to ask each of the groups to just say, like, what was the sort of gestalt awesomeness about their tree? Blue oak, starting with blue oak.
I'll do it. Characteristic, there are two different leaves. The smaller ones are the bluer ones, and they're more prickly. And then the older leaves are smooth, but it's the blue ones that give the, and it's early branching. It kind of goes out all over the place. It doesn't have a main trunk, and it has a huge,
so there's a good example.
Right, yeah. It has huge acorns.
Big fat acorns, yeah.
Great acorns.
Okay, what about Oregon? Theirs was up here, by the way. Oregon, where are you?
Yeah. Scaly little cups to their acorn.
Very good
like,
observation.
Deep set,
scaly little cups. Deep set, scaly little cups.
Orange oak gall on the underside of the leaves, and there also appears to have been some sort of insect that eats the leaf, but not like burrows in it, so it separated the two layers of the leaf. And
what would you maybe call something like that?
some sort of little burrowing thing.
That's perfectly acceptable. Leaf miner is another word that is used. Any other Oregon oak observations?
A couple of different types of bird activity. There was an acorn woodpecker, it looked like, bigger holes, and then some little tiny holes. So a flicker maybe, I'm not sure.
Can you show us one from here?
Oregon?
Yeah.
It's that one right there. We're gonna
what does that mean, that one right there?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
That one of those trees up there.
That one there. We'll go up there, you'll be able to look at it up close. Okay, what about valleys? You guys were like,
Yeah, we were having fun.
super intense.
I was really excited about the galls.
The galls. What are those?
Well, they're formed, well, as best I know, insects that create a little house to live in. Or what, like one of them was a wasp gall. I don't know the name of the gall. But then there's also little Hershey Kisses, small red ones.
Yeah, if you did not have a chance to see a gall, because your tree might not have had them.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
This is a couple.
Little Hershey Kisses. I know. They are. They're all super fun. Everybody. Yeah, that.
It's pretty different than the others.
Oh, lanky, deciduous.
Deciduous.
Deeply lobed, spiky leaves.
Deeply lobed.
5 to 6 inch
What's
leaf.
on the tip of the lobes? Little spines. Yeah. And about the acorns?
The acorns that have hula skirts for the caps.
There's a good hand gesture. Black oak.
And most of them were double trunked.
Double trunk. And we have lots of observations that you all made. Did anyone else come up with a hand gesture to describe their tree or their leaf?
No, just that it's I think for live oak, just the little curtsies, the ones that
Right, and the little cup. This is kind of a cool thing. You can always tell it's a coast live oak because the leaf is curved like a boat. And coast boat, yeah. And some of the other live oaks, which we're not going to see today, have twisty leaves or flat leaves. So if it's a boat, it's a coast live oak.
Very leathery.
Is that a coast too? Or what is it? That's a coast live oak too, yeah. So I need one volunteer from each of the oak groups to come up here.
Ready to go.
I'll start picking people if you don't volunteer. It's something that is going to be very comforting and useful to you as you learn these trees. It's probably a little too much information for 3rd and 4th graders, but trust me, it's really worth grasping this. So, where's my black oak and coast? Both live? Okay. you guys stand over here together.
You want to hold this? I know.
Yeah, you can have those.
Okay.
Hold those.
Stand over here.
And then Oregon and white and
Blue.
Oregon, blue, and valley. Okay. Do you have any props from your?
No, I didn't.
I have an acorn, but I didn't want to leave that.
There we go.
For which one?
That's an Oregon, and here's a. So remember what we were? I was trying to quickly and not too boringly go through the Quercus thing, the genus and species. You are all the same genus, and you're 5 different species. But botanists, being what they are, they like to subcategorize everything. So there's something called a subgenre. So below the level of genus, you're split into 2 more groups. So you are the red oak subgenre. Even though you're called black oak, you're called the red oak subgenre.
Of course.
You guys are the white oak subgenre, even though you have blue oaks. So blue oaks are white and black oaks are red. And all over, if you go, all over the country, there'll be oaks called white oak and black oak and red oak, and it'll be totally confusing. But for the purposes of California today, these are the 2 main subgroups of the Quercus genus. And the reason that's important is because you guys can make babies together. You can hybridize.
Okay then. And what do we call those?
We'll get to that. And you guys can hybridize with each other. You cannot hybridize. Red oaks can't cross with white oaks. It's just very apartheid here. This is just no.
And you're there to make
If
sure
you
that
tried
happens.
to, I mean, your pollen might land on their flowers, but nothing would happen because you have to be in the right subgroup. So, remember when Dave was talking last week about how lumberjacks would name wood based on the color of the wood? That's where these terms came from. This wood tends to be red, so they're the red oaks. This wood tends to be white, so they're the white oaks. But within that, they're each their own genuses, species. So if you guys have babies, they can't have babies. Right? So you would have a baby, it would grow into a tree, but then it couldn't reproduce.
Would it make acorns?
It would make acorns, and it would make leaves, and lo and behold, they would be exactly a hybrid of live oak and black oak. The leaf would look, if you took this and put it in a blender with the coast live oak and popped it out, it would look half and half. So every one of your offspring is always going to be 50-50. Does that make sense? Because it needs the original parents to make one.
So it's making a new species.
I don't think we do it all together. That's drawing a picture. One of the leaves is very rich.
Sometimes leaves up the top are much smaller because they're getting too much sun, and the leaves down below. So without seeing it, that's my best guess. But then, okay, so every time you guys make a baby, it's 50-50, and because we always know what it is, we can give it a name. Does anyone know the name for a live oak, black oak hybrid?
Live black oak.
Oh, it's more poetic than that. It's up on our big poster. It's not on your card, sorry. But we can show them to you.
So you have an evergreen breeding with a deciduous?
You have an evergreen breeding with a deciduous. You end up with a leaf that's a little bit smaller than the black oak leaf, but it's kind of tough like the coast live oak. And the acorn is kind of halfway in between. It's called an oracle oak.
Oracle.
So there are oracle oaks throughout Sonoma County, and if you're fortunate enough to go visit them, they're stunningly beautiful. They lose about half of their leaves, they keep about half their leaves. Their leaves are sort of 50-50, and they're always 50-50, and they're beautiful. We have like 3 of them here, They're all up on the rim trail, which we'll get to one of these days. Nice. Now, you guys,
Ménage à trois.
you guys can hybridize. Not only can you all hybridize with each other, but when your babies become mature, they can hybridize.
Oh, that's confusing.
Which means your first batch, like let's say who are you? You're Valley and I'm Blue. If you have 50-50, then that 50-50 hybridizes with another 50-50. Then you get 25-75.
Oh my God.
In other words, you can have 10% of one and 90% of another, or 40, 30, 60, whatever.
Wow. Does that mean that there will tend, because that can happen, that there will tend to be more of those kinds of trees than the two over there that can't keep making babies? Right.
There will be more of the hybrids.
Yes.
Because they keep reproducing.
They can reproduce.
And here's the secret of oak identification at Boubry is they're almost all hybrids. So especially the blue oak, the blue oak and the Oregon oak.
I didn't hear you because you were whispering
Oh,
over there.
I'm sorry.
We heard.
Blue oak and Oregon oak are notorious hybridizers. So when you're out with your hand lens, like I would look at this and say, yeah, definitely blue oak. But you'll see trees where you'd be like, huh, Oregon's supposed to be lobed, but it's not, and it's not really blue. So just keep that in mind, because we're going to see a ton of trees that are hybrids. That are hybrids. And because the hybrids can hybridize, nobody bothers naming them, because you don't know what it is exactly. Just trust yourself that if a child asks you, they really, really want to know the name, just say, it's hybrid. That's what it is. The other thing I wanted to quickly go through is another way to tell these two groups apart is, remember the grass skirt of the black oak? Red oaks, oaks in the red oak subgenus, tend to have scaly acorn caps, so kind of like a grass skirt. Whereas these guys have bumpy acorn caps. All the white oaks have bumpy acorn caps.
Oh, you want back?
Okay. Bumpy. Yeah. And coast live oak, which is a red oak, all around here you'll see they have scaly acorn caps. So scaly, bumpy, and when you start using your oak identification card, that's often the first thing you look at is is it bumpy or not? That narrows it down a little bit.
When some of the reading said hairy, is that a different one again?
Hairy on the leaf or
when the
acorn? Yeah, so for example, the canyon live oak, which is up the canyon, it's got little hairs inside. So another good handling use.
That looks like a sea urchin, kind of.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah. And that's
Galls. Does someone have the little cute urchin-y ones?
Yeah.
I just have the big
Oh yeah.
ones.
That's a cool one.
There's a white one, but we saw plenty of red ones.
Yeah, there's little red. There's little red.
Got it right here.
Turban hat.
Some of you probably were not lucky enough to come across these.
It's like me.
These are the white volcanoes.
Red volcano.
Hershey's Kisses.
Hershey's Kisses. Spiny turbans. So I can't remember. Did you all? How many of you read the beautiful article about the call of the gulls?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let me
How
just
many
get.
are you going to read the beautiful article?
All of us.
We will also next year we'll have a whole class in our advanced training just about gulls, because it's. I mean, if I could go back to school and start over and study something, this is what I would do, because they're so
It's very mysterious too.
It's very mysterious, and there are things about galls that even the most brilliant gall scientists haven't been able to figure out. So here's I'll just give you the basic story. But remember, with kids, you want to get them to ask those questions that were coming out here, like, oh, what do you think that is? You think it hurts the tree? What might be in there? How might we find out? But let me just give you the sort of
Real answer.
Quick and dirty.
The quick and dirty. There are many organisms that cause galling on plants. Some flies do it, midges, but for the oak world, most of these galls are caused by little tiny wasps called cynipid wasps. They're about the size of a grain of rice. They're not like the big buzzy. No. So here's what happens. This is so cool. Mama wasp, who is looking for a very specific chemistry on a very specific type of leaf.
At a particular time as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is your microphone on too? It should be. Are you not hearing me? Okay. So, there's a water I can stand on. Okay. So she lands. She's looking for a very specific chemistry. You can sometimes find two leaves exactly identical right next to each other, and one of them will have a bazillion galls and one will have none. No one really knows why, but there was something about this leaf that she preferred. So she takes her little ovipositor and deposits an egg on the surface of the leaf. That egg hatches, and there's a little larvae that hatches out. The larvae then secretes a chemical that causes the tree to build it a house, according to the blueprint specified by the wasp. So this was built by the valley oak tree. This was built by the valley oak tree. But it was built for this specific animal. The same tree built two completely different structures for two different species. And many cynipid wasps can form the galls on like all of the white oaks or all of the red oaks, but they can't cross that subgenus boundary. Some of them have to be on one specific tree. There are galls that only grow on coast live oak. And then the gall, the little larvae, she, because they're all, in the fall they're all she. She grows up, matures, and then burrows her way out of her little house. And usually at this time of year the galls start falling off. And then she goes off. There's a whole long life cycle we don't have time for right now.
There are no male larvae?
So in these cynipid wasps, they only have a bisexual generation in the spring.
Oh, okay.
And in the fall, it's all females. And one of the things I like to point out is the bisexual generation in the spring, same wasp, bisexual, really boring houses. I mean, they're not
wasp. They do different.
Yeah, the ones in the
guys
spring.
have no taste.
Yeah, the ones in the spring, which have both males and females, aren't nearly this cool.
When you say bisexual, it means the same wasp has both genders?
No, it means that the female wasp who lays the eggs hatch into male and female larvae. But the galls that they make are kind of boring. So the question is, if they can get by with those boring, basic efficiency apartments in the spring, why bother doing this?
So we can enjoy
For us.
maybe
That's my answer.
What?
Better
That they can.
Yes.
They can. It's beautiful. Why not? I mean, if you could build this, why not?
What's the tree used to build?
Cause it to be built.
But there is, yeah, you cause it to be built. That's a good clarification.
Chemistry, you talked about the chemistry is what.
Yeah, so the chemical that the wasp secretes, the larvae secretes, actually reprograms the DNA of the tree. So the tree's using its carbohydrates, but it doesn't know what it's doing. It's like, wah! I'm building this little white thing. So I don't know. Good question. We'll look it up when we get back.
And when I walk in the fall, you see the big.
Yeah. The big California oak apples. I'm going to just talk about these really quick, and then we're going to move on.
Yes.
Oh, those are different than
So yes, in the fall, by all means,
Yes.
go on a gall hunt with your kids.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. How many you can find? What color are they? Let's draw them. What do you think's inside? And then the most obvious one that most kids have seen is the oak apple, or California California oak gall wasp gall. It's called the California oak gall wasp. So many of our docents do this, and I would highly recommend it. When you find a good one that you like, cut it in half.
Yes.
And keep the 2 halves in your backpack.
Yes.
Rather than cut it in half every single one you find, just pick one, cut it in half, and then when the kids start looking at it, you go, oh, check this out, dudes. And you open it up, and you can show them the little chamber. The little chamber where the wasp larvae mature. And then oftentimes you can find, this one's pretty young, you can find the exit hole where the adult wasp escaped.
Well, how do you know they're not in there still?
Sometimes they are, if you cut it in half. And that's really cool if you do.
Do they sting?
No, they're little green larvae things. Yeah, little worms. But you can look at them with your,
And none of that's food, is it?
Well, it is food, and especially if you find a big old one.
Yes, like this.
You'll find not only does the larvae eat the inside of the gall, then there are other wasps that parasitize the gall, like they lay their larvae in there just for fun. And then there are wasps that eat the gall, and then there are birds that burrow into it to eat the larvae. So one California oak gall can support like thousands of species. Wow. I think there's, in Ron Russo's book, I think there's an actual number. I'm exaggerating, I admit, but a lot. So a lot. And this is just a tiny small one. Some of them, yeah, it's a lot.
biodiversity. Good way to put it up. I don't think all of us saw it opened up.
Oh yeah, go ahead and pass that around. Okay.
So the bigger the gall,
I'm in oak woodlands, and it's mostly oak trees. Buckeye is one of the species that grows in lots of our habitats, including oaks, mixed evergreen, and the chaparral. There's something so cool. There's so many cool things about buckeyes that we can talk about all day long. But there's this one little exercise you can do with kids, which I think is just so fun. And that is the how old is this twig exercise. Did you all read that?
Yeah.
Okay. So especially in California, where we've been going through these drought seasons and then really wet seasons, this is just a really cool thing. So here's a twig. And if you looked at your diagram, or if you have it with you, you can follow along. But basically, what's happening here? What's this? This. Yeah, this is the terminal bud. And what is the terminal bud? It's next year's first leaves, right? So deciduous trees, when they lose their leaves and they overwinter, they've already made next year's first leaves. And they overwinter as these terminal buds. So the very first thing that happens in the spring is the terminal bud opens, and these little buds, they're called bud scales, the little things that are protecting the bud all the way around, fall off. And it leaves a scar that's like a pipe ring all the way around the twig, because it's all the way around the terminal bud. So you get a pipe ring. Regular leaves, when they fall off, they just leave a scar that's on one side, because they're just on one side, like this. They're not all the way around, like that. So you can look at a twig, and if you can find the last pipe ring scar, that is right here, this is where this twig was a year ago. The bud was right there. And then the year before that, here's the pipe ring scar here. It was right there. and then the year before that, and so on and so on. And one of the things you can see is some of them are really obvious. You'll have, this is a pretty good year last year.
It had lots of rain.
Lots of rain. Not as good the year before. Really not good there. So you can actually sort of look at the whole history of rainfall.
Do the branches typically come out of one of the pipe rings from that 1 year's growth? The sprigs that come off the side, do they always come out of a pipe ring?
The leaves that come off the side?
No, for example, this guy is split off. There's another branch that's come out here.
Right. That came from something that's called an axial bud. It's a bud that's on the side.
Okay. Not
a terminal bud. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a terminal bud and a possibility of
Makes the oak woodland so fantastic. And one of the reasons why Native Americans really cultivated their oak woodlands is because they have so much food. There's so much here. Where we're standing right now is in the spring a big patch of what are called Indian potatoes or blue dicks or brodias. They have different names. Beautiful little purple flower. Well, one of the reasons Native Americans burned the ground was to cultivate that because it was food. It was little potatoes that they would eat. So it's going to be so cool as soon as it starts raining to watch this lower part of the oak woodland start coming back to life. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you is one of the things that happens when we burn, and one of the reasons why we do burn, is when you get all of this thatch built up. This is all non-native annual grass imported by the Spaniards to feed cattle when they came. That has largely taken over most of California's grassland. We are very fortunate at Woodbury that we still have a big remnant of our native grassland. And one of the things you can see in the burn area are these clumps. Right? If you look closely, even though it hasn't rained yet, these have little bits of green on them. That one has a lot of green. Why would that be?
It has roots.
Resprouting.
It's resprouting, and it also has roots that go 2 meters into the soil.
So the burn doesn't hit the roots.
The burn doesn't hit the roots, and these are purple needlegrass, which is the state grass of California, by the way. Didn't know we had a state grass. But if you can get a sense. Here's a plant that has roots that go down 2 meters, which means it can suck up water even in the hottest, driest part of the year. And then think about these. Oh, here's some more. Pretty. And then think about these guys. Yeah, good, right?
So is there purple needlegrass?
Grateful for this weather because it's really cool, but it messes up the sensory experience that we would normally be having right now when you go from the sunny open oak woodlands
into the shade.
Yeah. And there's a really cool word that describes this transition zone.
Oh, ecotone.
Ecotone. Woohoo! 10 points.
I didn't know it until last night when I read it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That's a really good word for kids. You can spell it with them. Oh, how do you spell ecotone? What does it mean? And it's that transition. This would be like the hallway in between, say, their porch and their bedroom or something like that. But it's this transition zone. And what do we know about ecotones?
A mixture.
It's a mixture.
They're a mixture, and because it's a mixture, they probably have more
biodiversity.
Yes.
More variety.
So these transition habitats are really important, whether it's like the edge of a salt marsh and an ocean, or so just keep that in mind. Okay, so sorry, we are entering what?
Riparian.
Oh no.
Okay, this is a mixed evergreen.
Yes, we're entering the mixed evergreen forest. And by evergreen, point to an evergreen.
The bay laurel behind you.
Bay laurel.
Bay laurel, madrone.
Yep.
Here's an Oregon oak hybrid thing. That's deciduous. That one's deciduous. There's a coast live oak.
Yep.
Oh wow! What's that big thing up there?
Dog.
The Christmas tree. I will tell you that when you say evergreen, and it's in your slideshow. In fact, evergreen is one of the vocabulary words in the slideshow in the classroom. What do kids think of when they think Christmas tree? And so one of the things about the mixed evergreen forest is to say, okay, well, you don't just have to be a conifer to keep your leaves all year long. And what is it about these leaves that is different than, say, the deciduous leaves? Just be thinking about that as we work our way. Yeah, north is that way, more or less. I don't have my compass, but more or less that way. So this slope is cooler. It's facing north, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it means it's spared the worst, hottest part of the solar radiation. So maybe that's a clue about why this is moist.
When does this become riparian for riding along?
It's actually pretty narrow. It's right down by the water.
Flood zone.
The flood zone, yeah. If we were in a big, wide portion of the Central Valley along the Feather River or something, the riparian zone would be much wider. So for practical purposes, even though we're kind of walking along the creek here, we consider this still part of the mixed evergreen in the canyon. And then there's big chunks of mixed evergreen elsewhere as well. But it's I'm talking about
The slime?
They sometimes, if they're stressed, this guy seems pretty mellow so far.
He likes you.
Look at those legs, isn't that beautiful? How many legs does a millipede have?
Lots of 1,000.
They actually don't.
More than a centipede.
Yeah,
They
don't
don't
tell
really.
kids, but it's not quite 1,000, but it's more than a centipede. So, in addition to the muncha decomposition song we learned this morning, there's a really cool thing about this animal, which is that juicy stuff, if it is stressed, I might find some like yellow juice on my fingers. Any ideas what that might be?
Urine?
Cortisol.
Could be urine.
A warning.
Kind of a...
Yeah.
Not many guys eat. Not many things to eat. They're one of the few things that can eat millipedes. And the way they do it is they wrap their heads around its head, or they wrap their whole body around its head. And the first thing they do is cut off that connection between the brain and its cyanide system. So, and then they just suck out the insides. So often you'll find millipedes that are just the shell of their former self.
Yeah, they fall apart.
Does anyone want to point out about, well, first of all, what are we looking at?
Redwoods.
Redwoods, but how are they arranged?
Berry rings.
Berry circle. So, what was here at one time?
The mother tree.
Yeah, so we are sitting in the mother tree. And redwoods, you know, the Latin name? Sempervirens. Sempervirens means always living.
Wow.
So the mother tree can die, but she sprouts up her offspring, her children, although they're clones of her, really. And I just love that concept of ever living. I mean, there's so many times you come across the redwoods in the woods, dead and down, and there's trees coming up right from it. So, what is this a relic of?
What was the question?
What is
It's a relic of an ancient forest from back in the time of the dinosaurs, right? So redwoods are really old, and why are we so lucky to have them in California? Why are they even here?
Because the only spot left.
Because of the coastal fog. So redwoods can actually transpire through their leaves, so they can absorb fog through the leaves. They don't have to always have it coming up. And here at Bouverie, we consider they're obviously places in California that are solid redwood forests, and it's a whole ecosystem in itself. Here, because of where we are, we're sort of back from the coast. We're not in core redwood habitat. So we consider the redwoods basically part of the mixed evergreen forest. Well, they're a special part, but and you'll see them in other places in the canyon, but they're pretty much restricted to this canyon area.
Fire adapted.
Three was 1964, the Nuns Canyon fire. And so the fire scars you see on these trees and some of the other big trees up in the big Douglas firs are from that fire. So, do you think it did much damage? So, does anyone know how redwoods are super fire adapted?
Very thick bark.
Yeah. Super thick bark.
And tannins.
And tannins, right? Which yeah, which prevents the trees from going up in flames.
You just said last fire was 18?
No,
1960. Did I say 18?
You did.
Oh, sorry. No, 50
19.
years ago. It was like 50 years.
What was the name of the fire again?
It's the Nuns Canyon fire.
But it wasn't really last fire, it was the last wildfire, because we just had a fire.
Right, right. It's the last wildfire.
I was in junior high school.
Oh, you
so
were?
So that kind of dates it for people.
Did you go to junior high school here?
Yeah. I was at Flowery. They
Oh,
closed school for 2 days because people left the windows open. It was hot, and the ash had come in, so they had to clean the classrooms back.
Oh, you have to tell the whole story of the fire, because I haven't heard it from a local person.
Yeah. My dad remembers driving. They closed like even the high schools in Petaluma, so for the kids that lived here, so they could come home and help fight the fire.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, in the interest of time, I'm sorry, we have so much to cover, but before we switch groups, I want to take you down to the creek. But does anyone have any last observations? And we have one back at the hall, which I'll show you if I remember. And they can get huge. And there's also aerial yellow jacket nests that look like this. One of the things I love about these is that, so what is this made out of? People call them paper wasps, but there is something specific that's a paper wasp, but they're all basically making nests out of paper.
Aggressive? No bark?
So they go to the wood,
Cellulose fiber.
cellulose fiber, and they chew it up and they make paper. And the different colors are because they've gone to different trees. So if you're one wasp and you make one trip to go get a little bit of cellulose, you lay it down and then you're done. You go get more. So each of these stripes,
Wow.
it's like that's wasp 1, that's wasp 2, that's wasp 3, and they're all female.
Males were all sitting back having a beer.
Female.
I was so annoyed watching the hurricane footage, and they were saving this baby dolphin, and it was like, poor little guy, let's get him out there. I'm like, chances are she's a female, but most of the spiders you're going to see are females. Most of the insects you're going to see are females. So.
Us guys don't have a chance out here.
Just saying. Anyway, isn't that the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?
Yes. Gorgeous.
I want to have a dress made out of this.
Is it actually the wood that they're eating that make the
Yeah, they chew the wood. Talking about plant communities. Again, if the weather were normal, we'd come down here and we'd be like, oh, that's so cool. Which is sort of one of the main attractions of the riparian area. But is there anything you notice about these trees along the creek that might be different from what we've seen so far?
The leaves are bigger.
Shallow roots.
Big leaves.
Big leaves. Why shallow roots?
They don't have to go very far.
Right, but why else? What would happen if there was a big flood?
So they can dry out.
Oh, sure. So they don't get buried too far.
Support.
Silted over.
Well, are they going to want to stay standing when there's a big flood?
No.
Do they want to put all that energy into wood if they're going to just get blown over?
Guess not.
Sorry.
Isn't that a cynical survival policy? It's like, oh, I'm going to die anyway, well, why bother?
Well, but that's...
You're going to resprout?
It's about the species.
Oh, the seeds will then come from that.
Yeah, and in riparian zones along creeks and rivers, just think about this winter. I mean, the water was up to like there. Boulders are crashing through here, and guess what? The dominant species in our white alder riparian forest is the white alder, which are these Alnus rhombifolias. And they're just meant to break off. When there's a flood, they'll break off. Pieces of them break off and wash downstream, and then they recolonize. They're short-lived. They grow fast. So if there is a flood and they fall over, you want to grow fast to get up into the canopy. You don't really need to worry about water loss here as much, right? Because there's water right here, and it's pretty shady. So you can have big, flat, wide, soft, juicy leaves, because as you're photosynthesizing and those stoma are opening and closing, you're not really worried about losing too much moisture. So riparian vegetation, or trees especially, tend to have really big leaves. And the big leaf maple is another one down here. It's also in the mixed evergreen.
Are you saying a big leaf maple?
Big leaf maple. And this is from the same tree. These are from the same tree. Did you guys see the handout on sun leaves and shade leaves? So some trees, like the big leaf maple, can actually design its leaves for where in the canopy it is. So is this at the top of the canopy or at the bottom of the canopy?
Big ones at the bottom.
Yeah, right. So the deeper in the shade, you want to like spread out as wide as you can, because you're trying to, like, you're a solar cell, you're trying to get as much sun. And if you're in the deep shade, you need more surface area. But if you're up towards the sun, you don't want to have that much surface area, so you tend to be smaller. And the same is true of black oak. Are any of you black oak people? No, they were in the other group.
I defected.
You defected.
Hybridizing.
Black oak are a deciduous oak. They're found mostly in riparian areas in California. You'll see some on your way up to the chaparral, where some black oak leaves are like, I swear to God, they're this big. And then this one, I would say, is probably, it was from that tree out there in the oak woodland, so
that tree out there, right?
The one that the group was.
Which one specifically is that?
The one I put the little flag on. Yeah, so that's an adaptation.
Where's the alder leaf?
These are all alder leaves.
Oh.
These, they have serrated edges.
Yep.
Parallel veins. But what I really want to show you, so when you get up to the chaparral with Jen, she's going to talk a lot about things that are adapted to the disturbance caused by fire. So just like up there, the plants all have adaptations to deal with fire. Down here, what's the disturbance again?
Floods.
Floods, right. So one of the really cool things that alders do, I don't know if we can actually see it. Chaparral? No, I'm sorry. There's a plant called Ceanothus that does this up in the chaparral. But what the alders do is they have these little nodules on their roots that house a bacteria that actually converts nitrogen into a form that plants can use. So it's called the nitrogen fixing plant. And when there's in an area where there's a lot of disturbance, it's somebody's job to make the post-disturbance environment good for the next generation of plants. And that's one of the jobs the alders do. And Ceanothus does it up in the fire zone, and lupins do it in the oak woodland. We'll talk about it a lot.
I noticed that which means I do a whole mixed bag of things. Oak woodland restoration, where I plant trees and I plant native grasses. I work on the mountain lion project. I pull invasive species. I kind of everything. But I don't do a lot of education. So when I'm pulled to do this, it's like, okay, I'll do it. I don't have the skill set that Jeannie has, but I'll do my best. I did get the question this morning about the cattle down there. It's like, why on earth you're a nature preserve? Why do you have cattle here? Cattle as a tool, just like we use fire to restore processes onto this landscape to get rid of some of the invasive species that are overwhelming our native species. I can't be out there pulling weeds all night long, all day long, but the cows can be for me. So I use them, just a few of them at a time. They're not ours, but they are our weeders. Why don't we use goats or sheep or other things? Cows have this great way of, if this is a perennial grass, which it's not, perennial grasses would be sprouting now from right down here. Cows eat from the top down, and so we pull them out of the pasture, the cows, before they damage the understuff that's growing. Goats just rip everything up, sheep nibble them, nibble, right down to the very bare soil. So those two species are not good for us, but cows are kind of just lazy eaters and just eat from the top down. So
And do you move them around so that they're...
We do. We're not micromanaging them. There's different styles of grazing, but yes, we let them graze. And we move them strategically. So anyway, that's kind of what I do, but I also did my graduate work in chaparral fire, so that's why I'm supposed to talk to you guys about chaparral. But I wanted to, you guys have just been in the mixed evergreen forest. Did you guys come up with a room that it feels like to you? What room did you guys say it would be? Or was there specific?
Sunroom. We didn't do that.
No. Sunroom. And the mixed evergreen? Oh, that was the oak woodland, maybe it was like a sunroom.
Bedroom.
Yeah. Living room or yeah, a den or a bedroom, something cozy. And then you probably noticed we're coming up out of that den feeling, we're getting a little more open. When we look back here this way, we see the patchwork of all the different types of vegetation. We see Douglas fir that are towering up. You have this oak understory canopy. You can see there's grasses through the trees there. And then on behind us there's all sorts of different shrubby stuff. I see the landscape like a quilt, right, with just different patches, and there's a reason that each patch is there. And I have this silly little diagram that I made up, so bear with me on it. Wherever it went. Plant Community STAAR. Let me stand up here without falling off the cliff. So there's STAAR. Those are all the factors that contribute to why that has Douglas fir there, and this has Hoyon and sticky monkey flower here. Soil is a huge driver, as anyone who has a garden knows. The soil will dictate what you can grow. What type of soil? I mean, I'm not asking for technical terminology, but what does the soil look like, feel like? What elements are in it to you? Very rocky, right? So if you're going to grow here, you're going to have to deal with that. How about just soil depth or drainage or anything like that if you're a gardener? Dry, not very soft and loamy. What's that? Compacted. How about topography? Just I'm talking terrain. Are we on a flat or on a steep? We're on a steep. So whatever grows here has to really have its feet anchored in. Aspect. Here I'm talking about north, south, east, west. What part of the sun is it, or what day's sun is it facing? Who knows where north is, by the way? North. Have you guys talked about that? I got people pointing all it's that way. So this aspect would be facing which direction then, if that's north? West. Sort of a southwest. So is that pretty hot? Yeah. That's hot. So this slope is going to get really hot. That over there is going to get maybe a little bit of morning sun. So that's going to be another factor. And then our last R in STAAR is rainfall. I'm using that as a big term for not just rainfall, but also fog moisture. So let's just talk about moisture. Where do you think the valley fog is in Sonoma Valley, in the valley. Up here, we don't get a lot of fogs. There's not a lot of moisture here, but the oak woodlands, where we first started, have lace lichen that benefit from the fog. But once you get up here, even if it's foggy down there, you feel the difference in 10 degrees of heat. So anything that grows here doesn't get a lot of moisture. They have to deal with a lot hot sun in the afternoon. They're on steep slopes and very rocky, poor soils. So that's my STAAR. Why this grows here, but there is totally different because they have a whole different STAAR. And then there's stardust. I call it, it's actually disturbance, but I just call it, make it into dust so it sounds cute. But disturbance is key. When you're on a slope like this, this is more prone to burn, and burn quickly and burn intensely. So you have to be able to hang with seriously strong disturbance. As maybe down in the valley bottom grassland, you may have some disturbance like grazing, but it's a different type of disturbance, so you can handle that. So anyway, this is, I just want to kind of let you think about this. What I did with my last group is we talked about stardust down there, stardust here, and then stardust up there, but we're not going to have time to swoop through it all, so we'll just do it here. But we've talked about kind of how hard it is to go here. So let's just walk up around the corner, and I want you guys to just take 3 minutes. Don't go too far. Basically, once you round the bend, stop. But look at the plants along the way, and think about the adaptations that it has developed to deal with the factors that it has here. You can use your hand lens to look at different plant leaves and things like that, and we'll reconvene after 3 minutes and we'll talk some specifics about species. We've pulled some elements of the ecosystem from below us, like a big oak that's a broadleaf oak, a madrone even, but we've added these new species. So let's just contrast those. This is an awesome opportunity. Big leafed, broadleafed oak tree compared to a shrubby little oak. Different species growing on different aspects, which is interesting, but that oak is just at the border of what it can tolerate. But this guy's going to do ultimately a lot better because he has a smaller leaf structure. So yes, absolutely smaller leaf structure. This is one of our 2 species of shrub oaks. This is called a scrub oak. Up at Cougar Pond is a leather oak. Super, super, super cool species. I wish you could see it. So this guy is adapted by having a small leaf. The leather oak has a similarly small leaf, but it's added 2 cool things. It's curved itself super tightly so that when it respires, it creates this like humidity chamber right underneath here. So it can stay kind of, as it's breathing, transpiring, it almost keeps it a little more moist and cool under there. So that's really cool. And then on its top, it's got all these little bluish white hairs, really dense, almost like a felt, to reflect the sun. So it's even more adapted. And right now it has full fat acorns up there and some really cool galls. So I'm sorry we couldn't get up there, but if you ever get a chance to go back up there. But those are 2 shrub oak species, scrub oak and leather oak. What other adaptations besides leaf size and more dense leaves maybe to give it some shading?
Well, they're dull. Using the
dull,
bark.
So the whitish hairs. What were you going to say?
I'd say using the bark to photosynthesize too a little bit. It's like some of these guys that peel the stuff.
Yeah, they do that. That's true. That's true. The bark thickness is actually a cool fire adaptation that we'll talk about in a second. There's another thought about just water loss I'm thinking right now, drought adaptation.
Going dormant, estivating?
Yes, going dormant. I think even the lowland ones go dormant too. Any other thoughts?
Big waxy leaves.
Vertical leaves. So notice this manzanita. It doesn't have its leaves flat. It's upright so that when the sun's directly overhead, it's really not catching a lot of the sun, and that's on purpose. If it was like this, it would just bake, but it's like this. So it kind of sheds the sun, so to speak, in the middle of the day. I wanted to talk about one other leaf size example. This plant here, if you guys want to come up, it's arguably the ugliest tree in California, or shrub in California, by far. Believe it or not, it's in the rose family. And you're thinking, that is in the rose family? Are you kidding me? But it is. Does anyone know the name of this plant?
Is that chemise?
It's chemise. Actually, it covers like 7 million hectares in California or something like that. But look at its leaf size. I'm just going to take this. This is such a vigorous plant. I'm going to not hesitate. You guys can pass around. Look at that leaf size. That's just teeny tiny. It's almost like a needle. And I know we're not talking about Latin names and really caring about Latin names that much, but this is where Latin is really cool. those needle-like leaves are called fascicles. Its Latin name is Adenostoma fasciculatum. So, fasciculatum, okay, it has fascicles, fasciculatum, I get it. So if you start learning some of the Latin names, it's really neat because you'll make those connections. There's a reason that something is called something. So it's kind of neat. But this is taking leaf size to the, to the extreme.
So this piece that you just passed out has a couple of little places on it where it has some white stuff. It looks like maybe remnants of where a bug was?
Maybe so. Yeah, I am not sure actually about that. I don't know. I don't know. What about also root systems, right? You can make your leaves really small, but you also still need some water. You got to go deep, especially in this stuff. And these guys can go 10 feet down with their roots. Super extensive roots. One thing that manzanita do, they have deep roots, but they also have something called a lignotuber. It's like a storage organ of carbohydrates and moisture that's under the soil. Not all species have it, but they can basically, it's like a storage space, you can just pull from what you need. It's like your storage cellar when you need extra resources, so that's pretty cool. Let's see, what else? That's most of the drought adaptation that we talked about, but it's kind of fun to brainstorm. How is this different from, what we just came through as far as adaptations.
Do the deep roots also help stabilize the hillside? I mean,
it does.
It's an area of disturbance, not just fire, but also
erosion.
Erosion and collapse.
Definitely. So they kind of work well together with that, most definitely.
And does the peeling bark on the manzanitas, is that part of an adaptation, did you say?
So here's what's so cool. These plants burn, and when they burn really intensely, and they're okay with that. Why? Why are they okay with that? They can resprout, and they also have an insane number of seeds that they bank in the soil. Chamise can have 10,000 seeds in a single meter underneath it. And not just chamise, this is just like, I don't know, the icing on the cake. After a fire comes through, you'll have a flush of like 200 different species that you've never even knew were here before. Because they're annuals, they only come up right after fire. Okay. They set their seed, they put it down, and they wait. Up to 100 years they wait. Just for that one fire to get rid of all this junk, and then it can do its thing for 1 year. And then it's gone. Oh, wow. So it's really cool. And these guys, they're fine. They'll come right back from sprouting and from seeding and all this kind of stuff. These guys are fine. But there's this amazing diversity that you can find after a fire, which is what's going to be cool about our oak woodlands. It doesn't have the same post-fire diversity as chaparral does. So if we were to have a fire here, it'd be really fun to come check it out.
Can you talk about the way the manzanitas grows, the bark?
Yeah. The bark?
Yeah. Why?
So why do we have a redwood has incredibly thick bark for fire resistance, but then here we have a manzanita with almost no bark in a fire-prone area.
It likes the fire.
It likes the fire. It does just fine. It doesn't have the resources because it lives in this hot, dry, rocky place. It can't make itself have a nice shield. I don't have the energy for that, it says. So I'm just going to forget the bark, more or less. I'll just work on keeping stuff underground, extra carbohydrates, extra water, so that when I do get burnt, I can resprout. So.
What I mean, though, is just the red is the only part that's actually alive. Is that correct? On the bark?
I don't know about that. Does anyone else know? I mean, I think there's a cambium, the tissue layers underneath that red that has the xylem and the phloem that's carrying sugars and water back and forth underneath there. It's just, it's not putting a hard, thick layer around it, but that red is a protective layer because it will peel back. As the bark, these plant ages, it becomes that brown or black bark on the top there. I can come see, but I don't know much about it. If you know more about it, then let me know. But this peely stuff, this is non-living, but underneath it there is the xylem and phloem tissue, the living tissue. Did you learn something different, or have other?
I just mean like this. It looks like this. All that looks like it's all dead. And the only part that's actually living is the red.
Right, that's true. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so this is decayed and broken down for whatever reason. And so yes, what's covered by red, that red is protecting all the valuable tissue underneath. So yes, that is true.
And I'm sorry, did you answer this and I just didn't hear you? Why does it peel?
I don't know. Does anyone else know why it peels?
But that's not an adaptation.
Oh, just to grow.
Why would you peel?
Because it's so hot up here, it's, I'd peel.
Right.
I peel one off.
Do we peel?
Yeah.
Like shedding your outer layer can be really powerful for a lot of reasons, right?
And it allows it to grow, right? It doesn't have a way to, it's not expandable, that bark. So it has to kind of peel.
And so once it peels, it's peeled. And same with madrone. It's not, they don't every year get that covering on them again that peels off every year.
It grows from the inside, right? So it's growing from the inside. So once your skin peels, are you done peeling forever?
No.
No. So continuously.
I see. Okay. That's what I wondered.
And it does peel at certain times of year, like the fall. And then the Indians use madrone bark to make a tea that would help with sore throats. And so they would come harvest that in the fall because that's when the maximum peeling time is happening. So
the other thing that I heard is that some people call it a refrigerator tree because the red is always cooler than the rest of the
right. Does anyone know why that is? You know?
Surface tension.
Surface.
Yeah.
It's not really cooler.
It's not really cooler.
It's not really cooler.
It's just because there's more surface contact, so it can either feel cooler or warmer depending on what the ambient temperatures are.
Yeah, great answer. So this is great. So that's always fun with the kids to go on a hot day.
I've
never felt it warmer. I've only felt it feel colder.
In fact, Gay and I, when we came here before the classes started, we did just that.
Oh,
and because
cool.
of ambient, it felt warmer or cooler depending on where we were on the trail.
Okay, that's interesting. Cool. That's very cool. As you can see, we have a lot of species diversity in this one site. We have stuff that we pulled up from the lower elevations, and we have stuff that we're going to see in the upper elevations. So this is what I call an ecotone. It has a tone of a little bit of both rooms that you're going to be passing through. Diversity-wise for habitat, for animals, do you think this is more diverse than sort of a monoculture chaparral or monoculture oak woodland? Or do you think it's less diverse? More, absolutely. So we have 5 wildlife cameras that we have at the preserve. They've been there permanently. They take pictures with motion sensor. In my ecotone cameras, I have far greater wildlife diversity than I do in my single, plant community camera. So that's kind of neat to think, because this is really a buffet for all. There's the cover that you need and whatever. So I know we probably have to be wrapping back soonish, but I just want to say one fun game to play with kids. Doesn't matter where you are. It can be an ecotone, it can be mixed evergreen, it can be chaparral, but divide your teams into groups. So for example, this group would be the mammal group, you'd be the bird group, you'd be the rodent group, you'd be the insect group. Think about whatever habitat you're in, how would that group of animals use this habitat for cover, for food, for reproduction, and then start brainstorming that within your group, and then you can compare and contrast. Like for example, how would hummingbirds use this area here? Does anyone know? Would hummingbirds use this area? And if so, how would they use this area?
I would think they'd go through it to another area.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it a corridor? Is it going a go-between? Actually, manzanita has this really cute little lantern-like flower, right?
Oh.
It's pollinated really nicely by hummingbirds.
Okay.
Another cool little factoid about manzanita flowers. Carpenter bees or little bees like to use it, but they can't always get in the narrow opening. They just drill a hole right inside to get to the pollen. So a lot of times in the spring or winter, you'll find out that there's like a little hole in the side of the urn, and that's because someone just said, screw it, I'm just going right in. So that's kind of neat. But anyway, the more you start to learn and pick up little natural facts about who uses what, you'll start to figure out how to play that game with your kids and figure out who's going to be using it. And ecotones are great because it has acorns, and so many things use acorns, wildlife species wise. And then chaparral, one thing I want to mention, so chaparral covers 10% of California. It has 25% of the plant diversity in California. And you're thinking, this? Again, it's that fire cycle. So if you think about, once all this junk up here is burned, you have this flush of all different kinds of plants going on, and you have different layers of wildlife recovery. So when it's open and bare, you might have just a few rodents running around, and you have the hawks that are trying to hunt the rodents. But once this grows up, a hawk doesn't really want to hunt in here because it's too thick. Would a mountain lion want to use this? Maybe to den with its kittens. It'll it'll put itself in there. But most likely they like the path of least resistance just like we do. And I'll show you when I get to my backpack, I'll show you a great photo up at Cougar Pond. Last month I was coming up with a weed trimmer because I was trimming the trails, and a mountain lion was coming this way 14 minutes before I was, so I spliced the pictures together. So it looks like we're right there. She knew that I was there. I never knew that she was there until after we checked the camera. But anyway, mountain lions are probably more likely to use this as a go between. But it's fun to pick groups of animals and play that game.
Oh, neat.
So, any other questions? I know we had to sort of condense our fire adaptation plant community. They synchronized their flowering timing. So manzanita, you'll see it blooming in January. There's not a lot of pollinators up here, so it'll get most of the pollinators working on it in January. In February, it's the ceanothus, or wild lilac. It's going. And then in March, it's some other species, and then I think May comes chemise. But they kind of like stagger their flowering cycle. Which they think is really cool.
They want to make sure to get pollinated, I guess.
Right, exactly. So guarantee your success by not competing with everybody else.
And then the pollinators always have something to eat too.
Right, exactly. Kind of fun how nature's all related.